Hi, my name's Christopher Rodriguez, and I'm going to be going over the installation, maintenance, and deployment of Virtual Advanced Academy. So, to start off with installation, the few things to make sure you have are MongoDB, and that can be downloaded from the MongoDB website. The community server version, which is under software community server. You'll have to select what information you want to download. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to go through that. The install process is also in Simple Wizard, so click next kind of deal. You shouldn't have to change any of the default settings. Node.js is another one, and that can be downloaded from nodejs.org. Anything in the realm of version 10 plus, which at this point 12 LTS is, I'd say, the most recommended version. Git, if you don't have it, Git SCM, I believe, is the official Git website. And then from here, you should be able to go to downloads. And I'm using Windows, but obviously you can download it for your platform of choice. And finally, Yarn. So instead of using npm, that's not the kind of Yarn, that's what I want. So instead of using the Node Package Manager, we instead opted for Yarn. It's actually a bit faster in terms of what it does caching for dependencies that are used. As you can see, the getting started should mention the installation. So you can download a Windows installer or use Chocolatey. I prefer Chocolatey because it's a lot simpler. But once you have all these installed, you're also going to make sure you have some kind of either IDE or what you call it, a text editor. In a sense, for Visual Studio Code is kind of a text editor, but I prefer Visual Studio Code. It's a code editor. It's free. You can download it for basically every operating system there is. And we can get started with that. So I'm going to, first off, actually clone the repository, and that is going to be located at this web address, which is going to be also linked in the documentation as well. We have both a front end and a back end repository. So we're going to start with downloading the back end. So I'm going to actually change directory into my desktop, and from there, facing your project, right, video folder. Video. Okay, well, let's see, desktop, senior, come on, okay, senior project, that's what it was, and then video. All right, so it's going to be git clone, and we're going to want to get this address. Alright, so the backend has been cloned into the backend folder, and I'm going to do the same thing for the front end folder as well. So it's going to be copy, alt tab, and git clone. So you see the front end has a bit more information in it. And as we can see, both are in fact there. So to start, I think it's probably better to get the backend up and running. So I'm going to actually open a new code editor window for the backend. And there you go. So the directory structure here, some information. So in order to get this started, you're going to do yarn which is going to, by default, run yarn install and install all necessary packages. And as you see, got that working. Another important part is we have an example env, so this holds the environment variables. I'm going to copy that and rename it to just .env. So MongoDB URL, that should be MongoDB localhost, and then slash, in this case, you can just call it internship. That's actually the current location for the existing database I have. Salt rounds, this doesn't really matter in terms of local development. For production, anything of 15 and above is recommended. And then the JWT token, as well as for the signing. So that can be whatever we want. So for local development at least. Now, after that, if I do yarn start, it should very much well run. And as you can see, it's connected to the database. You can tell if it's running actually if you go to localhost :3030 and give a 404 at the home page, which means it is actually working, it's serving information. And if you can go to the API docs folder, you'll have information there as well. So back to here. So as you can see, we're also getting requests. So everything is up and running well for that part. Now, if we go back here, we can then start setting up the front end folder. So I'm going to also create a new window for the front end. And in doing so, we can see the directory structure here. For the front end, we're going to do a similar approach of running yarn install again. I wrote out that time, didn't need to. This one might take a bit longer as there are more packages, but let's do that all the same. And as you see, it completed, and now you can just do yarn start. Actually, there's one other thing to note with the backend. So right now we have yarn start. I'm going to kill the backend server for a second, and I'm going to do yarn dev. So you'll see the output's a bit different here. That's because yarn start was basically just regular starting the server. Yarn dev is a bit more fine-tuned for development. It's running under NodeMon, which actually allows you to change the code for the server, and it will automatically restart on change. So I would open up in another window, but when we ran also yarn start for the, let me actually log out. So when we ran yarn start for the front end project, it actually automatically opened this in our browser window. So localhost :3000 is the local address for the front end. And as you can see, that's also there. So it was getting the request for a second there. So if we go here, go to the home address, it's there, and click login. I can log in with my test user. I think it was test-dt, and a totally secure password. As you can see, it worked. We're getting information already from the server locally. So that goes about the installation part. The maintenance aspect of things you'd want to do in terms of getting development done. All the code is located in the source folder. For the front end aspect of things, the front end has an assets folder, which includes assets you'd be including as part of your pages and whatnot. And there's other typical assets required, like images and whatnot. We have the application config, which is currently set up for using Heroku, and uses localhost as the API address when running locally. Screens, which house the main kind of pages, like we have our home screen, our login screen, our main screen, our profile page screen, the actual survey page that's given to new users, and the contributors page. Each of the modules' specific pages are created as part of a module content piece, and these specific pages are part of that folder. We have shared components, which are things that are reused within the application, such as containers, footer. We have module cards here, module content, the actual data, the metadata that's for a module, as well as a utilities folder, which holds a client utility for making requests to the API. All right, so to start, if we want to make a new page, we can actually go to, I think the simplest method would be to take one of our existing pages. Let's say we're making some other kind of screen. In this case, creating distinct pages is a bit different than creating module content. So I'm going to copy the contributors page. Let's say we just want to actually rename that. Let's say we want some kind of about page, something like that. So I'm going to rename this to about, and as well as renaming the export over here to about. So at the very least, we can keep this scroll to top and just to kind of show things in a minimal aspect. I'm going to remove the rest of this code that's specific to contributors, and let's see, I don't think a lot of unused imports, but I don't believe anything that should break. And to actually make this page visible, we need to go to our, I believe it is, app.js. App.js holds the main routes for our application, and as you can see, we have contributors here. So I'm just going to, oh, not the key command I wanted. There you go. So we're going to do that, and we're going to give it the address about, and we're using a higher order component to add a container to it, and that's going to be the about, and that should automatically import. Press enter, and it does. So we saved, it compiled, it gave us a lot of warnings, and as you can see, that's fine, but they're not errors. So if I go, all right, so there's nothing that links there, but I can at least go to the about web address. There's nothing, but that's kind of expected because we're not outputting anything. I can actually put a typography tag here and test, call it variant equals h1. Save that. There you go. So perfect. Now, if we want to create a new module, that actually means we have to edit the module metadata. And this module data file has information on all the modules that are created. So in order to create a new module, we need to actually add a new entry here, and we have to actually make sure that the module ID is unique. As you can see, found some other occurrence there. So I'm just going to do Control F, 2 of 2. If I do module 11, that's actually also still not unique. So module 12, and there it is. And you notice it's an array, so the position actually matters. The position it appears in this array is the position that it appears on the website. So we have module 12. The slug should also be unique. So I'm going to call it my new module. And as you can see, we have this as my new module. So for the description, it's also something that appears under it. The image is actually supposed to be to an image you would include under the assets folder, under assets, modules, I believe content, not content, no. It's under modules itself. These are all the module images for the module card itself. Component, so we actually store the actual React component, or at least a reference to it's imported, that this page will actually load, and then we do that because all our routes for these modules are created dynamically, as can be noted under, I believe it was module routes. So we actually dynamically built all the modules required for each module itself through the data stored in module data. So right now I don't have a component. That's all right. And then the icon is the icon that appears next to it. So if we go back to the home page here, it seems to have errored out. Current completion is undefined, and so we actually do need to modify our database code to actually modify our code in the event we actually need to add a new entry to the database that we have because we're retrieving completion information remotely. Though for sake of this maintenance, I think I should be able to remove that, at least that requirement, at least from the front end. Let's see. That's under module, not module car. That should be under main. Module.id, and I believe it's under here. Current completions equals module ID. I think if I set it up here as module ID, completions, yeah, there you go. If I set current completion equal to 0, that should technically work. Structure property current completion of as it is undefined. 1 second while I fix that. Alright, I just had to make a minor tweak to the way the state is defined in React for the completion stuff, but as you can see, there you go. So the new module, as you can see, is there. If we click Get Started, it points us to the Hungry for More component, only because we left it as such. But if we want to actually create a new component, we can go under Screens, Module Content. Similar to how we did with a page, we can copy an existing component. I'm going to do that for the overall question. Actually, do a more clean one. Application process. So if we go here, I'm going to rename this file, call it my new module, and change the imports to new module. So the, let's see, new module. So the actual module data is taken from the modules array. It's currently just filtered out with a basic filter title, but I can honestly filter out by anything. In this case, I'm going to choose by ID. So module 12, sorry. And as you can see, we have a module content tag. If we actually want to store information or display information on this page, we can do that through adding information to the module content tag. That's not that, it's not Shift F. Oh, whoops. To the module content tag. So right now there's currently nothing in it, but if I add a module pagination component, or let's see, module pagination. So what this component is going to do is actually going to give our page the ability to have pages, or a page and sub pages, in terms of, like, you know, page 1, page 2, page 3. And that in part also needs to be wrapped in a module content dot page component itself, because without this special subcomponent, we cannot actually render any pages. It would ignore it. So in order to do that, we're going to do typography tag just to test again. And list it as test, and then just so we can make sure we see it, a variance to h1, and I'm going to modify these to new module, and this may or may not error out. I don't think it will. Oh, that's not module content. My bad. That's supposed to be module pagination page. And then that's just module content. All right, so formatted, saved. If we go here, we also need to go back to our module data and import our new component, new module, auto imports, and if saved, we come back, click get started, and bam. All right, so it's actually importing again the same information from the information we had from the more content, yeah, because we copied that. But again, if I change information here, this is my new module details. That, there you go. Again, it's using the more image because we're referencing that, but you can see it says test, lets you go back to modules if the page has reached the end. And we can actually add another page if we go back here and introduce a new module pagination dot page, and let's see, typography tag. This is some more content. So after this, we'll notice there is a next button, which then leads us to the next page, and so on. All right. So now that we've gotten through over making a new page and making a new module, modifying an existing page, it's also pretty straightforward. We just go back to where our module content lies. The module, like we said before, the module information is under the module pagination tag. The behavioral questions module, for example, has actually got a lot of information in it. And inside it's also got the different module pagination page tags used to define the different page breakpoints. All right, and that covers maintenance for the most part, at least from the front end aspect of things. For the back end aspect of things, we have also our models, routes, utilities, and data transfer objects. These all rely on the source for the back end, as you can see. And the data transfer objects are pieces of schematic information that define allowed information that we're going to be taking in as part of our API. So if someone's sending a username, we extract an existing schema detail from the new user data transfer object. And the password is also extracted from there. So if you look at new user, that's when we're creating a new person. Login when we're logging in. As a new user, your full name is, we're removing white space. Everything is required, as seen by these required methods. We're using Joy to actually do the data validation at this point. We have models, which are what's used to store information about a user. And the model for the user includes the completion information, full name, username, a lowercase version of a username that's used for uniqueness, and the username is used as a display name. So if I type a name with capitals in it, it's going to be stored and displayed as that. But for the sake of uniqueness, it's going to be stored as a lowercase version as well. Email, the password, completed survey, that's information about the survey that was user must complete at the start. The completion is the completion information, so I completed a module completely, that process is stored as well. We have routes. There was a test route created here just to make sure it was deployed. And users, we use Swagger in order to document this information about a route. And there's also the different routes that exist. So everything under user / for the API, see it says users completion, that information is all defined here. In terms of creating a new route, this can actually be done within this document, and I'll show you that in a bit. We have utilities as well. So make completion is actually the rules for completing a module by X amount of percentage, based on the user survey data that was given to us. We have question keys, which is also more information in terms of the mapping for the responses, as well as the valid responses that we have for the survey, and that's also validated as a part of the schema. And we have our main app configuration, or definition, I should say, in terms of setup that's required, required imports, the database connection, information on the actual routes. The base routes are actually defined here. And We have error functionality and error handling defined here as well. We have tests as well. We have the environment. And as we've seen was set before with the database connection. And we also have our package.json, which also defines the packages that are used in this application. So for creating a new route, I'm going to go to the user's file, and we see a few of them here with a few different pieces of information tied to them. So this is an Express API, and because it's an Express API, we're using the Express routing, and Express routers are defined as, we have our imported router, and we have a verb, so get, use, post, that kind of information. So in this case, if we make a get route, which is something that will easily just kind of getting, we can define the actual route location, in this case testing, and mind you, this is all under the user route. We have middleware that's defined through JavaScript functions. You'll notice here we have a validator.body, so validation for input data, for data that's given, is done as middleware. We have validation through the JWT. So this is validating whether the request was authenticated or not. And as you can see, as a survey, we're not allowing people to post survey information unless they actually are logged in. We have then finally the actual method that's going to allow us to send a response back, so which is also in a way technically middleware in itself. So we're going to make a simple method just like that. So we have rec and res, standing for request and response respectively. So a simple response is going to be res.send req, and I'm going to actually respond with the request object. And actually, let me do JSON just so we can see that. JSON P is actually going to give us some padding. So I save that. As you can see, NodeMon restarted the server. So if I go to localhost :3030, and I do /user /testing, and that's incorrect because I probably did not write that correctly. Yeah, that's right, I'm missing an S. So users /testing. So kind of works. It's just that the information we're trying to print created a circular structure, so it's not going to print that. So instead, let's say I do request.headers, which might be a more reasonable thing to output. So if I so if I refresh, it responded with the information that it retrieved from the request headers that I sent from that request. And that is the main maintenance for this. New models follow the Mongoose structure of creating new information. So you create a new file. It's going to import mongoose.schema, and from there you can define a new schema, and then you can also export that and use it as part of the application. And then as we can see in routes here, we actually have the user model being used to store survey information, and that's easily imported here. All right, so for the deployment aspect, we actually can go back to GitHub, and for the front end is actually automatically deployed via GitHub Actions to GitHub Pages. So we'll notice I've made some previous pull requests here. We'll look into one of them. So this pull request actually ran a GitHub Actions workflow file. And as we can see, for the front end, that is stored under here, GH-Pages deploy. And as you'll see, it's got information being taken in from environment variables that are part of the GitHub Actions settings. So secrets.deploy token, you may need to set this up for your information as well. It may depend. And for the backend, initially it was using Azure, but Azure was taking a little too long to build that stuff out. So instead, it's actually built through Heroku. And as we can see over here in Heroku, I have the API set up here. In order to set up automatic deployments, I just went under deploy and connected my GitHub account. Once my GitHub account was connected, I was able to specify which GitHub repository to actually set up for deployment. And the deployment strategy is set up to automatically deploy when anything is made, any changes are made to master. And with the workflow we have for both backend and front end, the backend actually is set up just like the front end to accept merge requests and whatnot to the master branch from development. As the development is a default branch, so master. So master branch will then be modified on a pull request, and through that an automatic process is enabled that will then notify Heroku. Heroku will then rebuild and reserve the application as well. Alright, so thank you so much for watching this informational video on installation, maintenance, and deployment.